Well, good morning and good afternoon. And how can I say that? Well, we're in two different time zones here. For me, it's in the morning, and for Masha, it is in the afternoon. And she is there in England talking to us from our office. And I'm very, very excited about this. She has some wonderful information about the limits and limitations of using phonics and some practical advice. So I'm going to start by just asking her to tell us a little bit about yourself, and then you get a chance to highlight your different books to us, and then we'll get into other things. So if you could just start by telling us about yourself, take it away.
Right. Okay. Well, my name is Masha Bell. I think you will soon, well, you might not discover immediately that I'm actually not English as such. I'm British, have been British since 1964. But the first languages I learned were Lithuanian, Russian, and German, and English after that. Now, but despite that, I ended up being an English teacher in England in quite a selective girls' school for 15 years. And then I taught in a comprehensive as well. So, and I taught German and Russian a bit as well. My main languages were, as I said, English. They employed me as an English teacher because they wanted me as a German teacher, but they needed an English teacher as well. So I ended up teaching both. But I wrote, my main book was the first one, Understanding English Spelling, which was published in 2004. And since, but that's quite a hefty book. It's still in print, but since then I've done smaller ones to make the main information from that big book more freely available. Most of it now, in fact, is on my blogs. I have 3 blogs in total. They're all about English spelling. The first one is English spelling problems. The other one is modernizing English spelling. The third one is literacy problems. I've also done a couple of YouTube videos, really to put out the information that I unearthed when I did good part of 10 years of research into English spelling and its history. But as I said, I did smaller books as well. Like this one is just rules and exceptions of English spelling. And English is full of exceptions, not so good on the rules, as I will explain later. I've done a small book as well specifically for parents, which is learning to read, to try and simplify for them what the basics are that the children really need to learn to get anywhere. And my latest one published by a publisher was this one, English Spelling Explained. And also I've done since then just a Kindle book, an online one that's really cheap. So again, they all contain very similar information. Now, why did I get into it? Why did I start writing about English spelling coming from a foreign background? But probably partly maybe because I come from a foreign background. Because I didn't start to learn English until I was 13 in Lithuania. Our first language at school, like in the whole of Soviet Union at the time, my first language was Lithuanian. We all had Russian from our second year at school. And then I started to learn English, as I said, as a third language. German I learned later because my life was a bit complicated. My parents were Lithuanian, but my mother fled from Lithuania to Germany. I was born there. I started speaking German as a little child. And then went back home to Lithuania where I grew up. So anyway, that's sort of my background. But the main thing is that when I started to learn English at the age of 13, I was horrified by its spelling. I could not believe that any language abused the alphabetic principles to that extent. But when our teacher told us that you can have words like and, like the A in and also in any, or man and many, my reaction was, this is crazy. And as I learned more of it, I kind of kept wondering, why are they doing it to their children? I could understand why they might want to do it to foreigners, to make it mysterious and difficult so that not too many people learn to speak and write English. that sort of made some sense. But to their own children, to put them through such an ordeal, to make learning to read and write so difficult. So that kind of baffled me for quite a while. But anyway, we all kind of go through life in different ways. I was moved to Germany. I had to learn German. I wasn't very happy there, so I decided I wanted to learn English to kind of catch up on my education, to just improve my life, really. And I thought, well, the only way to do it is to go to England. So I became a childminder, or au pair, as it was then called. And I did, well, I suppose back then I was reasonably bright and quick on the uptake. I did learn it all relatively easily. And I took some exams and I ended up going to a university in England. And I didn't intend to become a teacher. I studied philosophy and psychology. But I want to do something with psychology, I thought. But to become an educational psychologist, you had to train as a teacher first. And as it happened, once I started teaching, I quite liked it. But the one thing that kept kind of bugging me a bit was that when I saw children writing an essay and then suddenly stopping and scribbling away, trying to decide which spelling was right, that kind of reminded me of my anger at 13 when I first met English spelling. Anyway, I then had children of mine.
I'm going to pop in here and say that is such a fascinating background. And by the way, it really puts you in the position of being able to tell from the different language in the rest, just how to get through the problems you're outlining. Now, my main audience are the teachers, and your book has so many golden things, or your books have so many golden things and so many golden ideas, and those practical charts we talked about and all the rest. So I'd like to move the conversation now into that. The kinds of things practicing, you're talking to teachers who are trying to teach phonics, the sound symbol relations and the rest. And there are just so many things that will be on your blog. And by the way, links to everything will be in the blog, in my blog. So they'll have links to all of your blogs with short descriptions about what they'll find there and links to your books. But nuts and bolts things that teachers can use is what I'm especially interesting to hearing about. And now I think we're into that part of the thing we talked about where the implications for your books in the reading wars, in the persistent 1 in 6 rate of functional illiteracy, in Anglophone countries and that sort of thing. So teacher to teacher now, tell us what you learned by doing it yourself, and the resources that you've created to help other teachers.
Yeah, so being a teacher, as I said, I was noticing that people in England, in fact, I was very surprised that even bright girls in a grammar school couldn't spell very well. I mean, I thought I had problems because I was a foreigner. When I realized that actually they had trouble spelling as well. But then when I had my own children, I realized that some learned to read very easily, like my daughter. For her, it was like falling off a log, right? She because she loved poetry, she knew lots of nursery rhymes by heart. So what she did then, when I got her some nursery rhyme books, she basically just linked the words on the page to what she knew in her head, and before long she was reading. when it came to my son, he was completely different. He didn't like being read to as a child all that much. He much preferred Lego. Getting him to kind of sit down and listen to a story was much harder. And of course, when he started school, for him, learning to read was a nightmare. Now he's a professor now. He was a bright kid. He was excellent at maths, right? Yeah, but reading and writing were difficult for him. So that kind of straight away made me much more sympathetic to the children who struggle with it. Because I know a lot of people, and especially teachers, they become teachers because they found it quite easy very often. So, but anyway, I saw firsthand how this is. And then I had to retire from teaching eventually because of throat problems. And it just so happened that then the media were full of blaming teachers for poor literacy standards. In the UK, and I then gathered from online things later, everywhere, in America too, there was an outcry about the high rate of literacy failure, the 1 in 6, which is still around now, just as it was in 96, and which was already around in 1919 in the UK. Which various surveys had established. So this is, so I got really angry because I just felt it was unfair to blame teachers for something which I kind of really knew was not their fault. And then came along phonics. In the UK, we had another review of reading, and synthetic phonics was everywhere. That was going to be the answer. And I thought, the idea is daft. You know, it's just stupid because English is not spelt phonically. You know, if you with phonic spellings, you would not have, and you have to visualize this, you would not have spellings like blue, shoe, flew, through, right? Can you picture how those words are spelled? Flew, EU, blue, UE, and so on. If English was a phonic language, they would all be spelled just with a double O, like to and food and mood and all those things. So English is definitely not written phonically. But it's much worse than that. Unlike any other language that I've come across, I mean, French spelling is a bit complicated, but English uses the same letters for different sounds, as in man and many, or in the O in on, but then also in only and once and other. Now, there's no logic in that whatsoever. And to pretend that the children can learn this easily, oh, some can, but they all need a lot of practice. And what I decided to establish then, I knew English was bad back in 1996, but I wanted to know exactly how bad. How many words were they with what I called stupid spellings? Because that's how I helped my son. Whenever he struggled with a word that made no sense, like through or thought, I said, oh, that's just another stupid spelling. And it did him the world of good, because he didn't blame himself for not being able to cope, and it didn't make him feel stupid. Because we could blame English spelling on it, it actually helped him a great deal. And I'm sorry to say, but even for learning to read, there are 650 words at least. I mean, that's sort of minimum of what I call words with stupid spellings that you can't learn by phonics. That essentially you have to just learn to read them by their look. You have to kind of imprint them on your brain. And once you get to the stage, and in fact, it's even more than that, at the very beginning, that's a very worst part of English spelling, if you like, that the beginning is so hard. If at least kids could learn the 300 most used English words, which you can find on various, you know, they list it in various places. If they all had sensible spellings, like many and any and once and, you know, thought and caught and all those. If those sort of words at least had sensible spellings, the kids would get a much easier start to their education. But because now they do their phonics bit, which all children have to, especially consonants, the vowels are the ah, oh, ah, I, those sounds, and especially the long ones like E. I mean, well, I won't go on, but you look up and see how the E sound is spelled, as in speech and speak and believe and police and 12 different spellings for one sound. Well, anybody want to pretend that English spelling is phonic? Just have a look at those.
Okay,
so
and before you go on, I want to promise my readers two things: that will provide them with a link to those 600 words that you talked about that are really, I like to call them irregular. So the irregular spellings, that we will give them that link, because I think that would prove to be a valuable thing. And then on the most used ones, if you have, I don't know if you have a chart that tells us about the most used ones that are spelled irregularly. Those two charts alone would be gold.
You find all the worst words for learning to read. They are all listed in my blog, which is on Blogspot, which is called Literacy Problems, and in there is a post called Reading Problems. So that one shows you 69 English spellings, right, that are used for more than one sound. So like the, police and lice and head and read. Well, that's a good one, isn't it? To read and have read. I mean, how do you expect children to learn with spellings like that? I mean, that one just totally amazed me when I first came across it. I just thought, they obviously don't want their children to learn. Whoever compiled the English spelling system, I decided that they had done a lot of damage to it to make sure that not too many kids left full educated and able to read. And actually, I mean, this is preempting things a bit, but when I looked into the history of English spelling, oh my, don't believe there are good reasons for the way it's spelled. A lot of the reasons are actually quite nasty. But anyway, that's by the way. So in that particular blog, as I said, on the literacy blogspot.com, there is this one that actually lists all the words with irregular pronunciations, that have letters or graphemes, whatever you call them, spellings, with different pronunciations. They are the ones that really are responsible for the high rate of reading failure. I mean, spelling is much worse. Spelling, over 2,000. In fact, it is 2,828 words that all have tricky spellings that you can't deduce logically. I mean, this is I don't know quite how to explain the difference between a writing system like German or Lithuanian or Russian or any of those. You start with a little chart, right, which gives you the alphabet. And then you have a few examples of words which show you how those letters are pronounced. And that's it. I mean, the teachers explain that to you, you practice a little bit. I mean, it's essentially what now happens in phonics. But if English spelling was phonic, that would be enough. You wouldn't need all the extra years and the extra practice and all the graded reading books and sending books home to parents, make sure that they practice for their kids, all of that. It just doesn't happen. Because when you have a chart that is reliable, and children, when they're trying to learn to read, once they've got the basics, they just get a book and practice. And it doesn't matter what book it is. You can take a really sophisticated... I started reading to my grandma in Lithuania when she was getting a bit... her eyesight was failing a bit. So she used to ask me just start reading out the paper to her, because she found it easier to just sit and listen. And after, in fact, because I started school a bit later, and I was 7. And anyway, she decided, I was upset because I started in November instead of September. My class could already read, because that's how long it takes to read, to learn to read in Lithuanian, right? Between September and November, most kids are fluent. So I was behind, and she said, "Oh, don't worry. I'm going to explain it all to you." And she spent kind of a couple of days writing out the alphabet, telling me how to pronounce it, right? And then after that, I kind of could cope at school as well. And but at home, for extra practice, she used to ask me to read the newspaper to her, and at first quite slowly. But the thing is, you when the system is logical, when all the letters make the same sounds, when all the graphics, combinations of letters, like ch, right? You have a chap, right? But you don't have character as well, you know? If it's only one pronunciation for a set of letters. So in English, as I said, there are lots, and especially, I mentioned earlier, there are sort of around 300 words that were identified already back in the 30s, and they haven't changed much. They are the most common used English words. They make up about a quarter of every written text. Some of those words appear in all of them. And even among them, nearly half pose reading difficulties, and spelling even more than that. But so if children at least learn to read as quickly as possible those words, the 105 or so, which again I've posted on my blog, in fact on several of my blogs, because I do think that they are the really crucial bit. That for children, especially if teachers are helping children who are struggling with reading, trying to explain phonics to them, or trying to explain, over and over again, because all children get a dose of phonics when they first start school. But and doing the same thing over and over again doesn't actually improve their reading. So the answer for kids who are really struggling is to just help them sight read the words like once and only and or, one and two and four and eight, those kind of bread and butter words that children can't avoid meeting, and they're certainly going to need them in maths as well. So concentrating to teach them those. What I did, you see, what tends to be the problem is that the kids who really struggle with reading are the ones who, they might be a bit on the slow uptake, but the other thing very often is that they don't have much help at home. They also might be children who haven't been talked to much from when they were little. So therefore their vocabulary is pretty limited. Now, bright kids, when they struggle with a word, they can kind of work it out. They can predict from the other things that they are reading and understanding what that word might be. But for slower children, that's harder. And because their vocabulary is not so great, and because their parents don't spend time with them at home doing their reading homework, if they have to cope on their own, it's really hard. So when I was helping kids who were struggling, I used to sit and listen to them read, make a note. I let them read until I had about 10 words that they found a bit tricky, between 7 to 10 words. And I used to kind of make a note of them. And then I used to say, right, let's look at those words again. You found those a bit tricky, right? And then I would take a word like friend, which is one for some reason children really find hard, and say, right, okay, you say it like this, and I'd write down F-R-E-N-D without the I, and say, can you read that? And they could read it. And anyway, so I did it like that for a few words. I put the word they struggled with on paper with a simplified version next to it, right? Depending on the child, they might take home for practice between 5 to 10 words. And the response from them was quite often, why don't we write like that all the time? I can read that. That was always the question they want. And I said, well, okay, for now, we just have to
Okay,
concentrate on learning.
I'm going to chime in here with a couple of things from on this side of the pond. The idea that we should make English spelling more regular is one that's been around on this side of the pond for quite some time. And there was something called the ITR, the initial
Yes.
teaching alphabet, ITA,
Yeah.
and that was people can read the history of that, but as it all turned out, for various reasons, a program based around that just never flew, in part because it worked for the kids that it worked for, but our populations are so mobile that kids that were coming out of ITA into something else didn't do well, and people coming into ITA late didn't do well. So it seems like we're going to have to live with this business of the irregular words. Uh, I think for my own speaking, when I am wired differently. My brain is wired quite differently from others, and and because of that, I don't view that as a problem though. It's just that I learn in different ways. So how to help those children. But I think what we've gotten now from you, and I'm going to make sure that the readers get a good links to the irregular words. Uh, uh, I'm going to do a little mini lesson here for my teachers out there that the difference between a sight word and a high frequency word is sight words are all the words by the time we read for a while, there are all those words we know by heart. But high frequency words are the words that were originally on our side of the pond. They were identified by Dolch and Fry, and depending on which list you look at, there's something between 100 and 300 of them, depending on. But Dolch and Fry did the basic work on that back in the day where there were no computers. That they were able to do that is just amazing. But those are the high frequency words, and knowing which of those are irregular is incredibly valuable for teachers, because then they know there's no choice. These are ones you'll need to teach by sight. And I know there are other systems out there and other folks that think, oh, we can teach all these different sounds over time. Um, and they can get all the sounds in. So there's all that controversy. But mainly what I was looking for here, and I think we've come to it, is your perspective on how to help kids make some sense of this, and especially the charts and the rest. I think my teachers are going to find very valuable. So I want to thank you for all that. Now, and now I think we're at a point where I will say any final thoughts here, because there's going to be a lot of golden things in the links to things that teachers are going to be able to use on Monday after they read the blog on Saturday. And I just have a feeling that there's going to be a lot of hits on your blogs where these charts are available. But any other final thoughts here?
Well, as I said, teachers are lumbered with this system, and they really have to try and do the best they can. And they have to kind of obviously do, especially for consonants. I mean, the word, the bones, if you like, of the words. They are really worth over teaching, because then, if you take head and dream and dreamt, then the other letters are okay. It's the EA bit in the middle. And if you think of, dreamt, great, dream, you've got three different ways. So obviously they are the tricky bits, the vowel sounds. So over teaching the consonants is a good idea, because obviously then that gives kids confidence. But for the vowels, it really is a matter of, different kids needing different help. If they got parents that are willing to read with them a little bit every day, and just stop and get them to look at the words that are tricky, and explain why they are tricky to pronounce and to read. That is an enormous help. But I would like to mention that in the long term, English-speaking countries, all of them, would save themselves a lot of hassle. It would end the reading wars. They would save themselves a fortune in terms of teaching time if they actually have the courage to start talking about actually making the system better. It's only been around since 1775, and it was standardized by a man who really didn't care about learning at all. And it's really worth asking, especially the things like the a, but the a is not too bad. That's a fairly regular, but e, o, and a, very simple sounds, have got perfectly simple, rational spellings, as in get the net set, sit in it, hop on top, rush the brush, whatever, all of those. If at least we just said, let's stop using the irregular spellings for those. At least let kids write as they think is logical, and just see what happens, because we might find, that they might actually start suggesting that we stop spelling stupidly, because in a way that's what it really is. It's stupid spellings that make learning to read and write English difficult. And they don't have to be like that. Lots of languages have improved their spelling systems, including, would you believe it, Chinese. China has been transformed since 1958, when they decided to have a simple way of writing Chinese. And back then it was really just for teaching reading. But of course, since computers have come online, been invented, now on mobile devices, the Chinese all spell completely simply. Very few people still write traditional Chinese. So things can change, and God, does that make a difference? China would not be where they are now if they had not adopted the simpler spellings back in 1958. And I mean, they worked their ways through with the internet and all the rest of it. So there is food for thought. If teachers really feel passionate about improving literacy rates, they should not be afraid to talk about modernizing English spelling. I've got a blog about that too. They might want to look at that.
Okay, well, that is a brand new perspective, and that I bet many have not heard. And just one more thing to add to the plate of things. In the meantime, for my teachers that need things to do on Monday, your blogs are going to be enormously helpful. So I really want to thank you for taking the time to do this. And we'll provide links to all the things. And I forgot to ask if you've ever done an essay or something like that about this new passion of what to me is a new idea of modernizing spelling. I'd love to have a link to that, or maybe I'm a co-editor of a statewide reading journal. If you'd ever want to do an article about that, consider yourself invited to do an article.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, how to modernize spelling. I would die for that article. But that all
right.
all said, I think it's time for that final thing, and I told you about it at the beginning, that I do at the end of interviews, and that is the Zoom wave goodbye. So
can I just
sure. I'm sorry, I'm too soon. Okay, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say that really my main passion now is for teachers to understand what is difficult about learning to read and write English, and that it's not the wrong way of teaching it, that it's actually that it's a system, the English spelling system, that makes it much harder than other languages. And my passion is for teachers to be aware which spellings are the worst, which ones are not too bad, for them to be aware of the difference. That English has plenty of good spellings as well. And I've actually published a list of the words that have got perfectly sensible spellings. On my literacy blog, there are 7,000 words, and they're divided into, if you like, sensible spellings and stupid spellings, or with sensible. So what I'm saying is that my main aim, really, for as long as I'm still around, is just for teachers to be aware of why their job is so difficult. Primary teachers, teachers of reading and writing. I want them to be aware of that.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for giving us all this information, and for the links that will be there for teachers to use, because I know, among others, it will make my life a little easier, because I like to do things like have children write their own books and the rest, and that will make that job even that much easier. Now, are we there? Are we ready to do the Zoom?
I think so.
And
Yeah.
thank you again. I just can't. You've been so gracious, so giving us such useful information, taking up your time, and I'll still say good morning here, but good afternoon there.
Okay.
And we'll try our Zoom wave goodbye now. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, thank you
Bye.
so much.
Bye.